Hello, 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 and welcome back to Scandal Queens, the only place where we sift through the trash of celebrities to find the blueprint of our own obsession. It is me, EB, the host you love or the host you love to hate. And today we're not just talking about a fallout. Yes, you've seen the title. You can tie it all together. But we're not just talking about the fallout of the Epstein files. We're talking about the literal collapse of a cathedral. Okay? For decades, we have been told a fairy tale about the music industry, specifically about the music mogul. And you know the one I'm talking about. Cigar chomping, suit wearing, probably has an entourage, someone who carries his umbrella. They're these geniuses who discover the girl in the choir and make her a pop or an R&B sensation. And he's the man who gives her a glass slipper, turns her into a goddess. We worship these men, these music moguls who quote unquote made these stars that we subsequently also worship. And we do that because we wanted to believe that greatness was something that could be earned or even bestowed. Right? That they could give us something and in turn we could bestow them with this title of greatness and all the power that comes with it. But here we stand in February 2026 and the DOJ just dropped 700 plus reasons why that fairy tale that we were being sold was actually a horror story. Talking, of course, about Tommy Mottola, the man who sat at the head of the Sony table, the man who, again, quote unquote, built Mariah, the man who Michael Jackson called the devil, while we all laughed and called Michael unstable. This week, Tommy Mottola's name appeared over 740 times in the latest Epstein document dump. And suddenly, the Sing Sing mansion, that 50-acre fortress where Mariah Carey reportedly had to ask permission just to go into the kitchen, it doesn't look like a protective nest anymore. It looks like a beta test for a very specific, very dark kind of control. From the 2025 Diddy freak-offs, revelations to the 2026 Wasserman exodus, the curtain isn't just being pulled back, it's being shredded, right? And reality is being laid bare for all to see. We're seeing that the same networking used to build our favorite pop stars was the same networking that was being used to facilitate unthinkable abuses on places like Zorro Ranch and the Island. So why did we look away? Why did we look away when people were trying to warn us, people on the inside, when we saw the obvious signs of abuse that were occurring? Why did we trade the safety of young artists for a catchy hook and a power couple narrative? Today, I'm going to help you deconstruct the mogul myth. We're looking at why society needs a kingmaker to worship and how that worship creates a vacuum where predators like Tommy Mottola become icons. So, put down your pasta sauce, Jimmy Fallon. We've got some real skeletons we're going to be digging up today. Before we dive into the deep end, let's just do a quick temperature check and see what other little scandals might be hiding in between the sheets of your Hollywood favorites. First up, pop's current it girl, Chappell Roan, just officially fired her agency, Wasserman Music. This comes, of course, following the most recent and massive DOJ document dump, which has linked mogul Casey Wasserman to, I'm calling her Ghislaine, I refuse to say her name correctly, Ghislaine Maxwell. Tons of celebrities have walked away from the label as it was real, again, that Wasserman was extremely close to Ghislaine. Chappell, true to her brand of not playing the game, was the first to walk, sparking a domino effect, which was quickly followed by Abby Wambach, and there was another, one of the big male celebrities as well, just walked away. Now, the thing is Chappell Roan the only celebrity with a spine, or is this the first sign of something that's really starting to shift, that people are finally going to refuse to inherit the industry's old guard baggage? I don't really know. Chappell is at an extremely early stage of her career in which one scandal could make or break everything. So it would make sense to depart anyone who was mentioned or tied to this latest dump of files. But you kind of have to question, she has been around for a few years, and these, I don't trust any A-list celebrity at this point. Jumping ship once a name is unredacted, okay, okay, these people were not exactly subtle about their behaviors, as we're finding out. So it just makes you question. It's yes, applaud them. Thank you for not standing behind this agency. But at the same time, let's not act like this is not also a very good career move at this early stage in her career. In one of the most disturbing pop culture world celebrity updates, Piper Raquel, the former child YouTube sensation, just launched an OnlyFans at the ripe old age of 18. 18 years old, allegedly making $3 million in 24 hours because the pedophiles aren't just in the White House. There's a new Disney Plus Hulu documentary that's coming out, or it just came out. I haven't watched it yet, but essentially it explores her mother's role in her career and the 2020 lawsuits involving her squad. For those who don't know, Piper Raquel she was a super, super popular little YouTube influencer. I think she did like cheerleading and gymnastics, and she was just like a little popular girl, quite frankly. That was kind of the whole thing. It got really weird because her mom, who was obviously a stage mom, ended up kissing on live a 16-year-old boy. And then it emerged that there was a whole lot of shady stuff going on with her mother, who somehow has escaped all accountability. Her mother is allegedly behind this, pushing her now into OnlyFans. To me, personally, it's disgusting that her mother has monetized every stage of her career. I mean, if you go back, there's another, I believe it's on Netflix, there's a documentary about these kid influencers, and I cannot remember the name for me at the life right now, but if you go and look up kidfluencers, you'll find it. Netflix. But essentially, her mother put her on the internet, and they had this really precise, staged, formulaic presence. And her mom was doing stuff on there like called cutie content and flirt content, where they set up their kids having their first kiss on camera and buying bras for the first time. It's pedophilic. It's pedophilic content. And now her mother, the minute she turns 18, puts her up on a sex platform. She had YouTube Squads, which is like for kids, and then now she's gotten OnlyFans. It's just, it's grooming. It feels like grooming, trafficking, prostitution, horrific across the board. Truly sad to see. It's like the stories that you hear about prostitutes in London's East Side in the 1800s. You know, it's unfathomable. So we'll see how this turns out. Statistically, no matter how much money Piper makes, which I'm sure her mother has control of, statistically, these kinds of situation in which parents groom and traffic their children doesn't end well. Next up, the $550 million Lively versus Baldoni courtroom clash. The legal war over It Ends With Us, a horrific movie based on a horrific book, has officially hit the quote-unquote storming out phase. That's because you can't see me doing the rabbit ears. This is what it's being called in the media, that we're now in the storming out phase. Essentially, in the last 48 hours, Blake Lively reportedly walked out of a settlement hearing after Justin Baldoni's lawyers pushed for a $550 million countersuit, which is hilarious. It's just the whole thing. It's ridiculous. We shouldn't even be paying attention to it. It doesn't matter. But at the same time, it's hilarious. And the internet is dissecting every frame of the footage because Blake does come off very, very hostile, which is nothing. And the irony of the whole situation does really kind of kill me, right? Because essentially we're watching these two narcissistic A-listers while the world is burning in their big fucking flashy, expensive camel-colored coats turn a movie about breaking cycles of abuse into a multi-million-dollar cycle of like litigation abuse. You know, and also, laughably, Blake Lively, who, as she was trying to sick Taylor Swift and Taylor Swift's fandom and a bunch of other people on Justin Baldoni, calling herself Khaleesi and saying that Taylor Swift was one of her dragons that were going to destroy him, she's the one walking in and out of court alone, right? She's the one who's storming in and out alone. So I don't know, who are the real dragons here? Who's the narcissist? I think they're all narcissists, and I question why so much attention is being given to a bunch of overprivileged, hacky, talentless fucks, essentially, when the world's burning down. Michael Bay has also been in the news alongside Formula One because director Michael Bay has sued Cadillac F1 team over their Super Bowl commercial in the 2026 Super Bowl that happened last week. Essentially, what it comes down to is Bay is claiming that he was hired to develop an ad. They called him and they said, hey, can you do this ad for us for the Super Bowl? And he said, yes. He did the ad, according to Bay. He designed it. They fired him. And then he says they stole his, what is he calling it? Visual DNA, his visual DNA. And he said specifically, the specific citation is sun flares and cinematic heat distortion. And he says that these sun flares and cinematic heat distortions are his intellectual property. Essentially, what Bay is saying is they stole my vibe. I vibed out a commercial for them and they stole it. They made it and they cut me out because they didn't want to pay me. But, here's the question. Can you really own a vibe? Is that a thing? Because certainly when working class people try to assert that, they're told absolutely not. You can't, you didn't design that. It doesn't matter. That's just a thing. So I don't know. Again, just like Baldoni and Blake Lively, it comes off as like the ultimate ego battle. It's a director who thinks he invented the sun versus $1 billion racing team. And I don't even know where the average person falls into the midst of this, but it just seems like more entitled, ridiculous stuff. And last but not least, the Ulta Beauty World 2026 event. It sold out in seconds, but as it turns out, somehow, conveniently, it just pretty much sold out to all influencers. 90% of tickets went to influencers, it has been revealed on this Ulta Beauty World 2026 event, which means that the everyday customer was cut out. The people who needed the deals, the steals, the access, the opportunity, nope. You're cut out. We're going to give it to influencers, some of which who are making like 80 grand a month doing nothing, and not the actual people who overall support these brands. Because newsflash, it is the lowest to lowest middle portion of our economic classes that hold up these brands, these luxury brands, these cosmetic brands. It is working class people who make up the greatest portion of spending when it comes to even brands like Louis Vuitton and all these other brands, which is shocking because, it's happening through credit cards and people overstressing themselves and yada, 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 overextending themselves. So this Ultra Beauty World has triggered now this kind of almost class consciousness event all over social media, especially on TikTok. They are claiming that this is influencer privilege. This is more rich people keeping the gates shut for other rich people. And it's ruined the hobby of makeup. Like, millions of people are genuinely pissed off about this and don't want to put their money. They're calling for boycotts and everything else. Ulta just accidentally, whether they'll acknowledge it or not, only time will tell, but they just accidentally prove that brands care more about the people who post about them than they care about the people, who actually spend the money. And people need to be conscious of that, and they need to be aware of that and try spending their money somewhere where someone does care, because those places exist. They're just smaller and harder to find. All right, so let's get into it. Tommy Mottola, the music industry mogul, Jeffrey Epstein, and how this all ties together. In late January and early February of this year, 2026, the Department of Justice released a massive dump of internal documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. We're talking text messages, emails, appointments, even claims from other people going back years and years and years, phone tips to the FBI, email tips from insiders who knew Epstein, who knew Trump, who knew all of these people, who knew Ghislaine. They've released a ton of it. And guess what? Tommy Mottola, the music industry mogul who quote unquote created Mariah Carey, who worked with Michael Jackson, Celine Dion, Destiny's Child, you name it. He is in the Epstein files more than 745 times. There's 600 to 745 documents relating to him. And most of them, the vast majority of them, are him calling Jeffrey Epstein, or Jeffrey Epstein sending reminders to call him back, that Tommy Mottola has returned his calls. They're constantly calling each other. And I'm talking about all the way back, well past when Jeffrey Epstein was already a convicted predator. There's emails in there from 2011 with Mottola trying to schedule visits and meetings between the two of them, 2012, 2018, 2019. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's sickening when you read this because whatever Mottola's trying to claim, there's an email in there from Jeffrey Epstein's assistant, Leslie Groff, and she is telling Epstein, oh, you've just received this huge box of Bridgewater chocolates from Tommy Mottola, which is this super expensive chocolate company. So why is Tommy Mottola seemingly sending Jeffrey Epstein this huge gift of chocolates? What is that about? Why, if you didn't know what was going on, if you had nothing to do with this man, why are you courting him with gifts? What would prompt that? And furthermore, when one gives a gift, one is seemingly saying thank you for something one has already received, or because one has a feeling for someone, or because you're marking something significant for that person. So it's just it's awful. There's references to travel arrangements. And what's also really interesting with this is that there's these flirtatious email exchanges with Ghislaine Maxwell and with Tommy Mottola. And it is very, very similar to these Casey Wasserman leaks, which is like, there's tons of fallout going there, but we're not hearing about any of the huge celebrities who work with Tommy Mottola saying anything, not breaking contracts with him, not going away from him, not speaking out against him for the most part. Right? There's been a little movement with Jimmy Fallon, which we'll get to in a second, but by and large, it's very, very gross. It's very similar to the Casey Wasserman leak. So there's all these communications that show that Tommy Mottola was very much an insider in these industry power players, and he was very much connecting all of these A-list musicians, Broadway stars, etc., to Epstein and the Epstein network. And as much as the big pop culture heads and celebrity worshipers want to deny it, this does basically touch almost everyone. You were either dealing with the Weinstein or Mottola, right? The Mottola Media Group. And it's going to leak into basically everything and anything you've loved since the 80s, including Mariah Carey. Like I said, we've seen just a little bit of fallout from this. Jimmy Fallon is all over Mottola's timeline. I found Mottola's Twitter, which looks like it was abandoned a couple years ago, and it's tons of celebrities. It's Bad Bunny. He's bragging about being friends with Bad Bunny, working with Bad Bunny. He's bragging about being very close, long time, like 30 years friends with Danny DeVito, and he's got pictures. It's also Jimmy Fallon. There's lots and lots of Jimmy Fallon, and he seems to be a very close personal friend of Jimmy Fallon, which has caused Jimmy Fallon to now scramble and abruptly scrap a pasta sauce business that they were supposed to be launching with each other, as if that somehow undoes the reality that for years and years and years he's been friends with someone who, yes, was now revealed in the Epstein files as being involved with Epstein and horrific crimes that were going on there. But this is not new. Okay, not when it comes to Tommy Mottola. This is no secret. For years, there have been warnings about him, and we, the public, have not listened. We have not ignored them, and we've kept playing along in the game. And there's historical context on that. You need a little bit of historical context if we're going to be really, really honest about deconstructing these music moguls and this image of the quote-unquote like savior mogul who gives us this miraculous gift of a pop artist. That is the biggest quote-unquote ever artist. To deconstruct this whole image, this whole quote, you got to go back. You need some historical context. And it really... we're going to go back and forth, okay? It's going to flash back between different past timelines a little bit. First, I think it's kind of helpful to revisit the 2002 Sony feud, okay? Because this isn't just gossip. We'll talk about the Mariah Carey stuff in a second, and a lot of that is, it gets watery because you can tell she's holding back on stuff. But this part isn't just gossip, okay? The 2002 Sony feud. This is a masterclass in how celebrities attempt to warn society about the men behind the curtain who are pulling some insane strings. So, with the 2002 Sony feud, there was a bunch of strikes. There was complete chaos. Anyways, the important part of this is that Michael Jackson appeared, okay? Michael Jackson appeared in these 2002 Sony protests that were going on. And at these protests, he starts talking just very candidly, and he says flat out, he called Mottola the devil and a racist during these Sony protests that were going on in Harlem at the time in 2002. Now, Michael Jackson claimed, calling him a devil and a racist, he said that Mottola intentionally sabotaged his Invincible album to bankrupt him on purpose because Michael Jackson didn't want to play anymore and was calling Mottola out for his behaviors. So Jackson said he tanked my album so that I would be bankrupt, and then I would have to sell him my 50% stake in the Sony ATV catalog, which also at the time included the Beatles catalog. Michael had just bought the Beatles catalog. So when this album then failed, Michael was forced to sell his 50% control of that stuff back to the label, and they had complete control. They had complete control over his music, how it was used, and they basically paid nothing for it, right? So Michael Jackson said, this is the industry practice, this is what's happening, and we know that that's happened. We know that that's happened because it happened to Janet Jackson a few years later. So this whole sabotage strategy is a story that has been circling around with some pretty factual evidence around Tommy Mottola for years, and other artists. Essentially, MJ was saying these record companies conspire against their artists. If you don't toe the line, they're going to destroy you. They're going to silence you. They're going to punish you. They're going to take everything from you and basically enslave you to the label. And that's what he was saying was happening, especially if it was black artists. And at the time when Michael Jackson said this, he was instantly labeled as crazy and unstable. That is the narrative that the media went with. Media, which we now know was very much in bed with what was going on with all this Epstein stuff. Because remember, Epstein got caught and convicted in 2008, but his crimes go way back past that. Way back past that. So the media leaned in with this. Michael Jackson's crazy. He's unstable. You can't take anything he says seriously. And that simultaneously hurt not only Michael Jackson, but it also went after Mariah Carey and attempted to invalidate everything that she had been saying about her career, also being attacked by Tommy Mottola for what? For refusing to be abused and enslaved by him. Now, here's where it gets important. We're going to go back a little bit further to the story of Mariah Carey and Tommy Mottola, because that is an excellent example of how these men, these rich and powerful men, music moguls, Epstein, all the politicians that essentially are in Washington right now as we speak, Mariah Carey and Tommy Mottola, their relationship is an excellent example of how victims are brought in to these shadowy freaking underworlds and held literally captive by these powerful men who then spin a myth around them in order to earn money and power and prestige, while all the time taking the autonomy away from these artists who are, yes, human beings. So for those who don't know, Tommy Mottola was the head of Sony Records, and he's also the one who is credited with discovering Mariah Carey. As the story that he spins goes, he was at a party and someone played a demo. It was Mariah Carey's demo. She was 18 at the time. It was 1988. She would have been just about to turn 19, or she turned 19 shortly after. She's essentially 18 years old. Okay, still at an age where she could have still been in high school. Just let's keep that in mind for a second. He was 39 at the time. He's at this party. He gets the demo. He hears this beautiful voice, and then he gets in his car and he races across town to find Mariah, this poor, obscure, wonderful, miraculous talent who's just degrading herself by working as a waitress in some dump of a diner. What he fails to mention at the time, that he was married. He had a wife of 20 years at the time that he met this 18-year-old Mariah Carey and started, quote unquote, cultivating. I know you're tired of hearing it, but we got to say cultivating her career, which we know what that really was, and brings her into the spotlight. So a whole dodgy story. Essentially, she was groomed, right? He meets her at 18 years old, says, I'm going to give you a record contract. I'm going to make you the biggest thing ever, and starts a relationship with her. Slowly but surely positioning her into a relationship while he gets rid of his wife of 20 years. But he does it. He signs Mariah Carey to the label, makes her a huge star, and then in 1993, they get married. So she's in her early 20s by this point, and he is in his 40s. There's a 21 plus year age gap between them. It's just horrific. So they get married, and it looks like it's a fairy tale, and it's wonderful, and she's the queen of the year, but it's the stuff that was going on is unimaginable. So he moves her out to this 51-acre Bedford estate, and it's called Sing Sing, allegedly because he's going to cultivate her singing career there. But also, Sing Sing is the name of a prison, okay? And that is very much what this was. It was a 50-acre, huge, isolated estate, not unlike Zorro Ranch, run by Jeffrey Epstein, okay? And this estate, it's got armed guards everywhere. They monitor Mariah's every movement. There were cameras hidden in the walls. She had to ask permission to leave the house or even go to the kitchen. She got isolated there. She was so isolated. She didn't get to talk to her friends, to her family, nobody. Tommy just basically kept her isolated in this estate. She didn't even know she was famous until 2 or 3 years later when they went to an event somewhere. I think it was France maybe, or Italy. I think it was in Europe. Maybe not. Maybe it was in New York. They went to an event and there was mobs of people, and the security guards were struggling to keep people away from her, and people were crying and like desperate to get near her. And that was the first time that she realized she was famous. That's how isolated she was. She had no idea how much money she was making. She had no idea how popular she was, where her music videos were being played, what was going on, nothing. Because he completely isolated her. And in 2020, Carey released a memoir that kind of finally went into the details of this relationship. And she revealed that these armed guards that were following her around everywhere on this isolated 51-acre estate, they weren't there to protect her. That was not what their job was. Their job was to monitor her every single move and report it back to Tommy Mottola, her 40-plus-year-old husband. Just like absolutely gross. But what is kind of striking about that, and why I kind of saved that for after the Michael Jackson allegations, is because this is shockingly close to what we know now was going on with Epstein. Like, looking back at that now, this woman who earns this man a bunch of money being held captive and also being forced to subject to him physically in an isolated ranch in the middle of nowhere, an estate in the middle of nowhere. When we look at that through the lens of 2026 and what we know was going on with Epstein on Zorro Ranch on the island, these control tactics, this isolating young talent in remote mansions where they don't have any hope of saying or doing anything, it mirrors so much the behavioral patterns that we've seen throughout the Epstein and the Diddy investigations. These are the same men operating in the same circles in the same patterns together. And here's why I think that story is really important. It's not for the sensation of it. It's not so that we can just yell and scream and fight over what celebrities did what and who we like most and yada, yada, yada. This is really a moment for us to stop and analyze our own complicitness in this whole thing, our willingness as society to look the other way, to buy the narrative, despite all the screaming red flags that were waving right in front of our faces. For decades, the industry and ourselves, we've worshipped Mottola because he quote unquote delivered Mariah to us, and he delivered Celine Dion. And I mean, some people are really thankful for Jennifer Lopez. I've never met those people, but she seems to have some fans who are super into it. And he was known as tough, and he was known as doing some of these things, but everybody was just like, well, look what he gave us though. So we got to look the other way because I love listening to Celine Dion on my way to work. We accepted it. We just accepted all the brazen red flags and warning signs and just choked it down as almost necessary somehow for pop excellence, which is absolutely absurd. It's like there's people who I've talked about before who say, well, you got to traumatize children to make them learn or to make them behave, which is, again, no, you don't need to brain damage children to teach them things. That's absolutely absurd. There's another thing to it too, though, right? It's beyond this worshiping these hit makers as some kind of saviors, which I've done a deeper breakdown on this. If you really want to know the psychology behind this worshiping these hit makers as these saviors who deliver these pop stars to us, you can head over to Substack. I've got a full deep dive on this whole psychology between the celebrities and ourselves. But there's a bigger cost, okay? There's a bigger cost that we have to acknowledge at this crossroads. And that cost is that when we worship these quote unquote moguls, we are worshiping the ownership of human labor. It's just, you're literally applauding, cheering, lining the pockets of someone who uses that money to subjugate other human beings for your entertainment. That is like going to a circus and watching a ringmaster whip lions until they jump through rings of fire for you. It is disgusting and it's absurd, and we have to acknowledge our place in it. In 2026, these files have now undeniably laid out that the same quote-unquote networking that's used to build these music stars is tied right into these same networks that were used to facilitate high-level predation, the murder of human beings, of children, of women, of boys, of men. You buying Celine Dion CDs, you buying Mariah Carey albums when she was still with Sony, you buying anyone who was on Sony's label, put money in Tommy Mottola's pocket to go abuse women and girls. And it's all in black and white, folks. You can head over to the DOJ website and look it up for yourself. And it also ties into this Wasserman ripple. Chappell Roan and other Gen Z artists are leaving agencies, right? Which is great. It's wonderful. We love to see it, but it's 2026. Why hasn't this been happening when all of this stuff has just, it's not even been hidden enough below the surface to even really call it hidden. We're talking about a centimeter deep puddle here, folks. Not enough to even get your shoes wet. It's not deep enough. This stuff was all but out in black and white print on CNN. And everybody who was inside knew shit was going on. But maybe it's a shift. Maybe the era of the untouchable mogul is ending. That's certainly what I'm discussing in my breakdown over on Substack and on Patreon. But we have to really stop now as fans and decide if we're going to prioritize ethics over predators, if we're going to actually stand for what's right, or if we're going to count ourselves among the villains as well. And that is going to be it for my deep dive on the mogul myth of Tommy Mottola, a man whose career serves as a masterclass in how power is built, how it's protected, and how it eventually rots from the inside out in the current world that we have allowed to unfold, that we continue to uphold ourselves. You and I have looked at the Sing Sing mansion. Disgusting, disgusting, disgusting. It's not just as a piece of real estate either, but as the blueprint for the isolation of talent, quote unquote talent, commodified human beings. We've connected the dots from the 2002 Sony protest to the more than 700 mentions in the February 2026 DOJ Epstein file dump. And you can't look at all that. You can't look at all these things. The story of what happened to Mariah, what Michael warned was going on with them bankrupting celebrities and destroying them in the media. Which, again, with Michael Jackson, I don't want you guys to take any of this as me saying, well, that means Michael Jackson was completely innocent because he was right that this guy was bad. No, this guy was bad, and Michael Jackson was also probably pretty bad, and this guy just allowed Michael Jackson's secrets to be exposed because Michael Jackson wasn't playing ball anymore. Okay, so let's just make sure we got that straight before we got on. But despite all of that, what we're seeing, it's not just one man's scandal. This isn't just, Tommy Mottola was a scumbag. He belonged to a network of scumbags. And not just that, but an entire architecture of control that the industry has used to gatekeep culture for decades. You have been told what to be entertained by, what to like, who to love, by pedophiles for the last 30-something years. They have decided that, and they have pushed away any other talent who refuse to allow them to operate in the darkness. Okay? And the more you invest in it, the more albums you buy, the more streams, the more time you stream these people on Spotify, the more tickets you buy, the more commercials you watch, the more of their TikToks and their Instagrams that you follow. You and I are subsidizing a system that historically views artists as assets and silence as a commodity. So before you go back to the world this week and get back into all the insanity, I just want to leave you with a few questions to chew on. Number one, if you knew that your favorite artist's quote-unquote perfect image was maintained through the same surveillance and isolation tactics as Mariah Carey, if you knew that the artist you thought you loved, who looked like this bubbly, wonderful, happy person, was actually basically just locked up in a mansion and not allowed to speak to anybody or do anything ever, much like Britney Spears was, right? It's not seeming so uncommon now, is it? If you knew that that's how their image was produced, would you still be able to enjoy their music? Would you still keep buying it, knowing that they basically had nothing to do with it? They were like an enslaved human. Would you still enjoy it? That's the first question I want you to think about. The second question is, now that we've seen names like Mottola and Wasserman in these files, are we going to stop equating industry power with genius? Now that we've seen Diddy go to jail for 4 years when he should have been in there for the rest of his life, are we going to stop calling these men geniuses and just start calling them criminals? I mean, I don't get to make that decision myself, unfortunately. And last but not least, why do we, as a society, feel more comfortable calling an artist crazy immediately saying Michael Jackson was crazy for saying that this guy in power is abusing his power? Why did we call them crazy for speaking out instead of questioning the scummy, ratty, disgusting executive in the background? Why is that so absurd? Knowing what we know about centuries of abuse and crime that have happened at the hands of these executives, let alone what we know has happened in the last 30 years. That's something I want you to think about as you go about your business this week. And that is where we will wrap it up. If you would like to help me keep digging into these receipts, please head over to Patreon, where you can join my growing podcast network. I also host the podcast Nooska there with my dear friend Connie. Head over to patreon.com/Nooska to join me there to support. You can get more receipts. I do some exclusive audio notes and little bits and bobs and some deep dives and little short breakdowns, so make sure you head over there. For daily visual deep dives and real-time updates on the 2026 file dumps, head over to Instagram, Scandal Queens Podcast, or you can catch my other breakdowns on TikTok at The Real E.B. Johnson. And if you want a more long-form, serious, introspective, grown-up version of this show, then you can head over to Substack, therealebjohnson.substack.com, where I have even deeper dives. This week on Wednesday, by the time you hear this episode, it'll be out, but I've got a really deep dive on Tommy Mottola specifically, and how his ties to Epstein are really revealing how this is the end of the gatekeeping era for the music industry and for the entertainment industry at large. And if you're loving the deconstruction, please don't hesitate to drop me a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. It's the best way to help other people wake up from the celebrity trance, and it's the quickest and easiest way to piss off a Swiftie. But other than that, thank you so much for listening. I hope this shined a little bit of light on what's going on for you this week, and keep your head up. Keep looking forward, and remember, keep your secrets close and the receipts closer. Stay scandalous, queens. I'll see you next week.